Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm really excited for the guest that I have on today because he's talking about leadership, and not just leadership for us as parents or in adults, but leadership in kids. And how do we develop that? How do we make them come out and be stronger as far as human beings when it comes to their leadership skills? I think it's a super important topic, and I think it's one that all of us parents can relate to. And there's nothing more than we would like for our kids to strive to be better than what we were or how we grew up. And I think that bringing out these leadership skills in our kids is one way to do that. So I want to welcome my good friend, Alan Nelson, to Dad Up. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Bryan. It's an honor to be with you and your listeners.
Thank you very much, Alan. Real quick, before we dive into to your expertise when it comes to leadership and all that, let's kind of dive into a back history of you. My listeners may not know who you are, so let's kind of hear a little bit about your history and kind of where it took you, how it took you to the place you're at now.
Sure, you bet. So here's the skinny of it. I'm an only child. I grew up on a Midwest farm, Southwest Iowa, raising pigs and scooping poop and doing all the hard labor there. And then I went to college. I got a degree. Then I went on to get a doctorate in leadership from the University of San Diego. And I was kind of leading in the social sector. And then at midlife, after a few books and conferences and teaching some college classes, I said, man, I said, what am I going to do the rest of my life? And my dad used to say, life is like a roll of toilet paper. The less you have left, the faster it goes. So I only had half a roll left. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I do the traditional leadership thing, I'd be working with adult leaders. But I'd worked with enough to know that I realized that adults are tough to change. They're preoccupied. They're a lot of set in their ways. They're, as you study neuroplasticity, you realize that it decreases with time. So something we can't change. It's just harder to change. So I got to thinking, what would it be like to identify and develop future leaders? Future leaders. What if future leaders came to us and said, teach me how to lead? What would we say? Well, those future leaders are our kids. So that began 2005. I started investigating what's being done to teach organizational leadership skills, right? Not just being a good person, but really what they teach you in MBA classes. Here's how to lead an organization. So found that nothing was really being done. They talked a little bit about leadership. It was about self-esteem and character, all good stuff, but it really wasn't about leading, distinguishes. And as a Marine, you know the difference between being well led and just filling the space. So I started the research project, which turned into a nonprofit, which turned into a whole age and stage curricula that I have taught around the world. And then just recently, we launched an online course just for parents to identify and develop their child's leadership potential. So I have 3 grown sons. They are wonderful, doing great work. And now I have 2 granddaughters who just start school this week. So, we're in that phase of life, but we're pretty stoked. And I'm very excited to talk more about this because I think a lot of parents don't realize the benefits of giving their child a head start in leadership, and secondly, the side effects of that in terms of reducing bullying, making more money, enjoying life more, having more freedom. So, kind of that's my end of life legacy.
Yeah, that's great. I think when I think about leadership, especially in kids, I mean, that's one way to help develop confidence as well. Helps improve their self-esteem, their confidence when you start to bring those things out. And a lot of parents don't know how to do that. I mean, we're just not leadership experts, right? And I want to get your opinion, though, on something. You had talked about, your grandkids, your granddaughters getting ready to go off to school this week. My wife just started with her students back at school this week. And one thing that they talk about, I've heard them talk about a lot in the last few years, is there should be some sort of studies or classes for our kids in junior high, high school about finances and things like that, regular everyday stuff that we as adults would normally go through. But what about leadership classes? I mean, those, like you said, those kind of classes are really at the college or, bachelor's, master's degree program, but there's nothing really for our high school students. And that's the prime age to really get them into those leadership skills. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree 100%. The first 15 years, we really focused on getting into schools, civic groups, faith communities, and we just found that with society moving the way it's moving, there was little to no bandwidth for these sorts of things. So church attendance is down, and so the youth pastors, children's people were saying, "Hey, we only get them for a few minutes every week. You know, we'd love to talk about leadership, but we could talk about God or the Bible." And
Mhm.
so schools just say, "Hey, we have to teach to the tests. We can't, afford any time on the side." And even in California, as you know, in California, they have so many restrictions, and you can't even charge for extracurricular activities in the state of California. So the public schools can't. So that's why we made the pivot, the shift to focus on parents, because I agree with you. That's the time we ought to be giving them life skills.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, we're teaching to the test, and those tests don't include many of life skills. So that's where we're stuck.
Yeah, I know. I think about those life skills and some of the things that we have to teach our kids as parents, like my boys, I've taught them different types of life skills, like how to change a tire and how to fix a light
Yeah.
bulb, on how to do little minor repairs in the house. And so my kids learn those kind of things, but they didn't have those traits in them automatically. It was something that I had to teach them. I had to show them how to do. For you as a leadership expert, what are some of the common signs of leadership potential in kids? What have you found there to be out there?
Well, first of all, before I sound like someone who's only interested in sort of like the naturally gifted leader, I think everyone should learn about leadership
Mhm.
because as you look at history, you realize even today, a lot of the heinous crimes done in societies is because people don't understand leadership. They don't identify what power and influence look like until they're under that subjection. So
Mhm.
I want to empower everybody, even if they're never going to lead, how to understand leadership so that they can be a great team member. But we know that about 1 out of 10 students has a high aptitude for leading, and sometimes these people get pegged as the troublemakers, right? They're the frequent flyers down to the principal's office. So they get the moniker of being a troublemaker, and yet they're the budding CEO. They're going to be a great leader down the road. So some of the indicators we look for, and we looked at a lot of assessments that people give to adult leaders. Those focus on effectiveness. We wanted to study emergence. Who's likely to emerge as a leader? And we found 4 unique qualities that leaders have who emerge as leaders. And one of them is they're just propelled. They have a self motivation, and they initiate things. Another is that they're persuasive. Leaders are always selling stuff. They're selling
Mhm.
their ideas, and they're selling themselves. They're
Mhm.
also planners, not like engineer planners, but they have the ability to see the big picture and break it down into steps. So they think strategically and tactically. And they're also comfortable with power. That's the 4th P. Power is something they seek, not in a negative way most of the time, but literally they like to be in charge. They like to feel like they can make a presence, and they stand up to people who are perhaps authority figures who are doing things that they don't feel are right. So they have kind of this comfort, and that can be disconcerting for adults because all of a sudden they've got this little leader who is like in a class situation, stealing attention away from the teacher. And a lot of times I found that about 3 out of 4 teachers don't like these kids because they can be troublemakers, and schools are about compliance. About 1 out of 4 teachers say, I love those students because they harness their natural social influence
Mhm.
and they use it in a positive way. So, again, it's just interesting how we institutionalize our kids, and sometimes they can learn leadership, but most of the time they get thwarted until they reach adulthood.
Mhm. That's interesting. When I think of those types of kids, sometimes I have two pictures in my head. I have the kids that are not necessarily the teacher's pet, but kids that really want to strive to be better and they look for ways, how can I continue to improve? So I see those types of kids because I've coached a lot of kids in sports. I've coached thousands of kids. So I see
Yeah.
those types of kids, right? But then I see the other types of kids that are so have the true leadership skills in them, like naturally in them. They're gifted in that way, but they have it almost to a point where they're arrogant and they're cocky, and those types of kids are probably who the teachers are talking about, right? Um, so how do you distinguish, or how do you separate them from acting in that sort of manner when you're trying to teach them these leadership skills, or when they naturally have that? Do you have a way that parents can really try to calm them down a little bit when it comes to that arrogance?
Well, as you know, as a dad of more than one child, they come from the same gene pool, but they're wired differently. So,
Mhm.
in our three sons, our oldest is kind of our cerebral guy. He's our mid-level leader, and he's just a thoughtful guy, but he can lead. Our middle guy was the belligerent, he's the take charge. He's kind of the natural leader. And our youngest, he's incredibly gifted. He's the personal trainer for Mookie Betts of the LA Dodgers, but he doesn't enjoy being in front. He can do it, but he doesn't just jump to it. So each child, just like every child in a class and every child in a family, you have to really individualize your approach to them, right? Because if you would look at our youngest and oldest and say, knock it off, they would just say, okay. If you would go to our middle son and say, knock it off, he would look back at us and say, no. So, you couldn't really, you had to be equitable, but you couldn't be equal because they're not equal. So I think you have to take each child alone. And in your case, the scenario you pitched, some leaders, they need to learn when it's appropriate not to lead. They need to learn how to follow. They
Mhm.
need to learn how to listen. And the danger of a narcissistic leader, they're all around us. And so we know that they're dangerous. Conversely, though, others, they simply need the confidence to know, hey, you're good at this. I see this in you. You just need to step up. Here's some ideas of how to do that. So, sort of giving them executive coaching, not telling them what to do, but asking them Socratic questions so that they start thinking more like a leader and then behaving more like a leader.
Yeah. You're so right when it comes to our kids and how we have to kind of raise them separately together, but separately in how our parenting approach is with them. It's so true. It's the same thing for, teachers, educators,
Yeah.
whether coaches, I mean, all those types of things. They have different kids that they have to kind of adjust their style to at least draw their attention or show interest in them, right? To get them to show interest in what you're trying to tell them. So yeah, I think about my two boys. My older son he's very independent. He's like, you couldn't really bother him with stuff, right? Like you talk to him and he'll give you his answers and he'll talk to you, but that's it. Like I'm too busy for everything else. I'm trying to work on me. Where my younger son is very sensitive. He's very, he likes to help people out. He likes to be there for others instead of himself. He likes to be there for others more than instead of himself. So he's got that kind of approach. So my wife and I have had to kind of parent them differently, but both my boys are two of my best friends. So they're both good boys. But
That's cool. That's
yeah,
cool.
um, with all this people that you worked with, whether it's been parents or students, how receptive have they been? Because I just talked about the kids that are kind of, have the arrogance in them, and that leadership skill that's in them draws out more arrogance in them. But then you have the other kids that maybe lack the confidence or self-esteem. And so when you try to teach them these leadership skills, maybe their thought process is, I'm just not good enough for that. I just don't have that ability. And so internally, they're very negative on with themselves, right? So they lack that confidence, they lack that self-esteem. It could be the way they're raised. It could be their home life. It could be just naturally who they've become through their childhood. But there's got to be a way that we're able to draw that out. But how receptive have those types of kids been, or what have you found with kids that have that lack that ability?
Well, I think, someone said, one of my favorite quotes is actually, a child is a book to be read, not a book to be written. So I think a good parent, and as a coach, I used to coach my kids too. We lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and some of those parents, they would just, even at T-ball, they thought their kid was going to be the next great
Yeah.
whatever. And I remember we had three kids from two San Francisco Giants were on our T-ball team, right? And those guys they were just chill, right? They laid down and they knew it was T-ball, But these other parents, they were living their MLB years through their kids. So I think most parents are aloof. Most parents sort of think, oh, the corporation will teach my kid leadership. But some parents are trying to live out their dreams through their kids, as you know, not
Hmm.
just through sports, but
Right.
other things. And so, they're like the tiger mom who just is always pushing, pushing, pushing. And the child wants to go one direction. They say, no, you're going to go this direction.
Right.
So I think the dynamics are very interesting. In my book, My Kid Leads, I talk about matching styles with your child. If you're a high octane leader, your child may not be. So you need to chill out and come down a bit. Conversely, your child may be a natural leader and you are not a leader. So you need to step up your game. And we talk about that. But I use the illustration of Starbucks cups, right? You get a tall, which is a small, a grande, which is a medium, and a venti, which is a large. So when I go to Starbucks, whatever size I get, I want it full, right? I don't
Right.
want, when you're paying $35 a gallon, I don't want it half full. I want it full capacity. So no matter our child's capacity, we want them full, but we have to estimate what is that capacity, right? So a full tall is better than a half empty venti, but still, if I've got a venti, I want them to come up. So I think, one of the things we talk about is matching them. And some kids just need someone to look them in the eyes and say, I believe in you. And it's like everything. It's like, in the military, you learn a skill and at first you're really gangly and you're awkward, but the more you do that skill, the more you're familiar with it and you get good at it. You may not be a pro, but at least you're confident. And I think that's what we want to see in those wallflowers. They may never be a CEO. We don't expect them to be. We wouldn't want them to be. But certainly they can be confident at their level of their capacity. And I think that's what we try to do. And that's what we see. And we see consistently that parents underestimate their child's ability to lead because they still see them as a child.
Right.
We see them as a future leader. So we have had countless stories of parents who said, man, what are you doing with my kids? And they're in this club and we say, hey, we're just putting them in charge of projects with their peers
Hmm.
and they're so much more confident. And I think sometimes I just for my podcast interviewed Robert Epstein, and if you he's in SoCal, and if you've not interviewed him, he'd be great on this show. But he talks about infantilizing kids, that we tend to infantilize our youth and then they rebel, and it's simply because we don't treat them like young adults, because historically you became an adult at around 14
Right.
and you started working on your trade and started raising a family. Well, now we keep them in the house until they're like 24 because they have to go to high school, college. And then we kind of don't change the way we treat them. And so, again, it's kind of the self defeating thing in society where we hold back people and we don't think they can do as much, but they can do so much more than we think most of the time.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think that one of the areas that I think about as a parent myself is that as my kids got older, they took on more responsibility. And I think that helped develop their leadership skills, is giving them more responsibility that they have to handle themselves. And we talked about it before we started recording, but how when my kids had a problem with or a teacher that they were having an issue with, or a coach they were having an issue with, they would share it with me, but I would tell them, this is your responsibility to handle. This is where you learn. This is where you grow. So I want you to go take care of it. And if for whatever reason the teacher or the coach is not being receptive to you, or they're not listening to you and they're not giving you a chance, then you can come talk to me and I will try to address it. But until then, I need you to address it. And that helps not only develop the confidence, they're nervous as hell going to talk to the teacher or the coach, right? They're very nervous about it. But when they do it, they get better at it, they get more confident, and therefore it develops kind of that natural leadership skill. And so I think that's one way to go about it. And I think that when it comes to us as parents, kind of, like I said, giving them more responsibility. But when you're in the home, this is for parents out there, when you're in the home and you're raising your kids, as you give them more responsibility, there's other things that you can do too. And I want to get Alan's take on this. There's things like, hey, we have to make a decision as a family, but I want you to be responsible for this part of that decision. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this part of that decision. So mom and I will take care of this area, and I want you to handle this. This is your responsibility. You're going to take the lead on it. We'll follow your direction. That will start to bring out a little bit of thought process in the child. That will start to help them develop the thinking skills, the critical thinking skills that they need. And therefore, naturally, I think help them bring out a little bit of leadership in them as well. It gives them responsibility, makes them feel confident, makes them feel like they're valued in the home. So I'm curious on your thoughts, Alan. What do you think on that aspect of things when it comes to raising our kids?
Well, Bryan, I think you are doing, it sounds like you're doing intuitively what we have been designing, for example, in our curriculum, because being a leader, and we define leadership as the process of helping people accomplish together what they would not or could not as individuals. So that's our stake in the ground. I had 700 books of leadership in my library. Only about 5% define the term. So when we talk about leadership, everyone thinks we're talking about the same thing. We're not.
Right.
So we define leadership more narrowly. We're kind of like snobs that way, because if everything's leadership, nothing is leadership. So we're talking about the ability to lead a team or an organization. And so I like the way you did it, because people sometimes give their kids chores, which you should do, but that's not leadership. Everyone should be doing chores, but leaders, they organize the group to do a chore. So it sounds like, so maybe the activity is getting dinner or Wednesday night, or maybe the activity is planning a shopping day when we have to accomplish all these errands and such. So putting a child in charge of a task means that they're in charge of the team doing the task. So it's not the child fixing the meal. It's the child figuring out, okay, what's everyone's schedule? Okay, Dad, so you're going to do this. And maybe you even give them a budget. Okay, we got $40 to spend on dinner. All right, so what are we going to have? Who's going to fix the food? Who's going to clean up after the food? The child may not touch the food or touch the table, but they're going to organize and make sure it happens. And then you do a debrief. Okay, how did that go? Did we stay in our budget? Did we work with people's schedules? Yeah, Tommy, he was late. Okay, so next time, how could you help him be on time, right? So those are the discussions, and they're every day. But parents, A, don't know how to do it, and B, they say, well, it takes so much time. Well, it only takes time to teach them. Once they're taught, they can lift that family load. So a lot of times we work so hard because we haven't trained our kids how to lead and then unleash them to lead. So really, in the classroom, in the home, our young leaders can carry a lot of the family burden that we carry because we haven't taken the time to train them.
Yeah. I love that. I love the example that you shared there. And I think it's right on point. I think it's exactly what I was trying to share. I do think there's a way to overdo it, though. You don't want to, obviously, we want our kids to still have a child. What am I trying to say? We still want our kids to grow up and enjoy the things that children enjoy, right? Activities with their friends, growing up, learning different things outside of the home, these extracurricular activities that they do with their buddies, all those kinds of things. We want our kids to enjoy their childhood. So we don't want to burden them with stuff that really they shouldn't be burdened with. I've heard stories of, kids that grow up and then they have to, because their mom is working and their dad is working, or maybe their mom's working, their dad's not around, they have to raise their younger siblings. That is not your child's job. Your child is not there to be your babysitter or to raise your other child. That's forcing them to grow up too soon. And what they will end up doing is not only resenting you for missing out on their childhood, but that could potentially prevent them from having kids of their own, because they knew exactly what it was like when they were raising kids at a young age. They couldn't handle it. They weren't responsible enough to handle it. And so they're thinking, there's no way on earth that I want to have kids when I get older. So, I mean, right?
Someone referred to as babysitting as birth control.
Right.
I'm not going to have kids.
No, it's so true. And so there are those areas that we can actually hurt or hinder their development
absolutely.
When it comes to leadership. But the one thing that I want to ask you, Alan, is one area that people don't realize, parents don't talk about enough, or maybe parents don't even do themselves, is a little word that we call affirmations. And affirmations are important because they help us to not only develop or think critically and develop ways that we can become better as people. But providing affirmations to our kids are actually very powerful. And one of the things that I used to do with my boys when they were growing up, they were at a very young age when I used to do this, but I used to tell them, you're a leader, you're a champion. Every night when they went to bed, you're a leader, you're a champion. And their response to me was, I'm the best in the world. Now, that's a little bit arrogant, a little bit cocky, a little bit too much confidence there, but it helped them develop, hey, my dad thinks I'm a leader and a champion. Why can't I be the best in the world? So that was always their response. I could tell you right now, Ellen, I could drop my 25-year-old off somewhere and I'd say, hey, dude, you're a leader, you're a champion. And he'll look at me and go, Dad, all right, I know I'm the best in the world. He'll do that for more. But when they were younger, they were always fired up about doing it. I'm the best in the world. And so it helped them to kind of grow and develop that confidence and that natural leader in them. What are your thoughts? I mean, I don't know if you guys talk about affirmations or not, but what are your thoughts on that when it comes to teaching our kids leadership?
Yeah, well, for a few years, I taught a graduate course at the USC School of Business. And I learned so much about motivation that I didn't know, just in the theories and the research and such. And the best motivation tool, the single best, is to reward desired behavior. Reward desired behavior. So when a child brings home a report card and they got a C and a B minus, what do our eyes go to? Boom, they go to that. And we focus on that, as opposed to saying, oh my gosh, you got 3 A's. That is awesome, right? And then you can talk about the C, but only after you've affirmed the A, and you don't talk about the C in a negative way. You ask some questions about what was challenging of this, how could I help you moving forward in this area? So I think there are positive and negative ways of dealing with it. And it really comes down to, Bryan, it really comes down to your wiring as a parent, because a lot of parents are negative and they only focus on that little thing that wasn't right, as opposed to seeing all the things that were. So affirmation and what you were talking about a little bit was a Pygmalion effect, that people strive to become as they're treated. And we like to be around people who see in us good things. We don't like to be around people who don't see good things in us, or they only see bad things. So I think helping a parents see the good in their child and their young leader and affirming those things, those are the things they're going to see replicated. They're going to see those behaviors increased and strengthened, and they're going to see the other behaviors diminish and they become extinct. So when we take away feeding that negativity, then we'll actually see more positive things. And there are times when we have to have, the little come to Jesus talk and say, hey, right, this can't happen anymore. We got plenty of those, but those ought to be a minimum. And my parents, I think they did their best they could, but they saw how we raised our kids and they say, we didn't do a good job with you. Mm-hmm. And I learned about parenting from my wife, because she is amazing. And she would do such a great job disciplining our sons. I would just say, hey, knock it off. And she'd say, hey, Jeff, come here. Let's talk about this. Josh, come here. Let's talk about this. Okay, guys, how are we going to resolve this, right? So she went through this whole conflict management series, and she would collaborate with them. And I'm just thinking, man, someone said, if all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I didn't have enough tools in my toolbox. So that ability to be appropriate, and as you said, to see the best, to affirm that's probably the single best human motivation practice, is to affirm desired behavior. And affirming your child is so important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not only for children, right? We as adults like to hear things about how great we're doing, especially if it's at the office. Corporate America, is really can be brutal on people, right? But at the same time, you get those attaboys even at your job. You're like, all right, I kind of like, I like feeling good. I like others feel good about me, and that makes me feel good. That makes me want to do even more. It's just a natural progression. And for our kids, it works the same way. They love when mom and dad feel great about something that they did. And if you're telling them, hey, dude, you got 4 A's and you got 1 D, and what happened with the D? What do you mean? You know, they're fearful. They don't even want to show you their report card next time, right?
Yeah.
I grew up the same way. My dad was very tough on me when it came to school, and I got A's and B's in school because I was scared of him, right? I did not want to disappoint my dad. But when I brought home one time I brought home a C plus, and my dad said, "You got a C plus here. I had everything else A's and B's. You got a C plus here. Why wasn't it a B?" What? Like, I messed up once? Like, I had trouble once in this class, and you're asking me why wasn't it a B? Like, that was deflating to me. That was
Yeah.
deflating. And you're right. My parents do the same thing now. They see how my wife and I raised our boys, and they go, "Man, we're so proud of you guys. You guys did such a great job. I just was not a good mom." My mom would say that all the time. I was just not a good mom. I'm really sorry. You know, like, stop. I don't need to hear that now. I'm 50 years old. I don't need to hear that stuff now. But yeah, it's true. We have to continue to affirm the things that our kids are doing. And we also have to continue to hold them accountable as well. Our kids do need to have that, get that sense of responsibility and hold them accountable to things when they do mess up. But affirming the things that they do well a lot more than the things that they do wrong is a perfect way to continue to help them grow and be better as people, as human beings. So I thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask you another question when it comes to one of the things that I looked up when it comes to leadership, and is something that I thought was very interesting, is it talked about teamwork and how we can not only develop leaders through teamwork, but also whether it's, through sports or, even at home, those kinds of things. How can teamwork activities benefit a child's leadership experience or leadership development?
Well, leadership is a social art, right? And so leaders are social architects. So you can't, when people say, "Oh, you got to lead yourself," that's just really self-discipline. So let's call it self-discipline. Let's not call it leadership. So that's my bias coming through. So leadership is all about influencing other people to move in the same direction, right?
Right.
Hopefully it's the good direction. So you have to have a team, and in organizational behavior, we define teams as two or more people. So it could be just one other. I think a real team is at least two or more, because the dynamics are so different than just one-on-one influence. But giving a child or a teen or a preteen, giving them an opportunity to be the team leader, that's when they feel the role, the responsibility. And I like that word responsibility, because a lot of parents confuse responsibility with freedom. They think their kids want freedom. What they really want is responsibility, because responsibility gives them strength, confidence, and more adult-like uh, behavior. Freedom is just the opportunity to do whatever they want. And studies show that really kids don't want that, because that creates insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to know where the rules are, they want to know where the guidelines are. And here's the responsibility. We want you to do this. And so you organize your brothers, or you organize the family, and we'll listen to you. And I think that's the role of the parent, is to make sure that an older sibling, or maybe a more dominant sibling who has stronger leadership gifts, that they don't hijack. We refer to hijackings where one stronger leader tries to take over for another. And I know in the military you've seen it, and we've all seen it probably in business and stuff. So you want to preserve that create an emotional moat around that child when they're the team leader, and say, "Sarah, you're in charge now. What are you going to do? How are you going to help us to work on this project together?" It could be game night, right? So it doesn't always have to be work. It could be a fun activity, but you're going to lead it. So this sounds like a funny thing, but we just rented a house in San Diego a couple of weekends ago, and our family had not all been together for maybe 5 years. So all of our kids, their wives, and our two granddaughters came out. We spent a long weekend in San Diego. And our youngest son, who is least likely to just step up and say, "Let me do it," he wanted to do the game night. And so he led us in the game nights, and he was awesome, right? So the point is that when we put someone in charge and we give them the opportunity to organize this and get us all working together, they can learn those skills and then they enjoy those skills. So you may be surprised that maybe your little, wallflower 8-year old all of a sudden loves it when they're in charge of game night or they're in charge of whatever activity it is. So yeah, I really believe that that's the key to being a leader is running a team is you really can't lead alone.
Right.
You have to be in a social setting. So that's what teams are.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that when I think about uh, really taking the lead on something for a team or with a team or with your family, whatever the case may be, I mean, I think about captains for sports teams, right? Because I coached a lot, obviously. So
Yeah.
you have your captains and you put your captains in charge. Those are the guys that are kind of leading the pack, guiding the team. You're just giving instruction, but they're really taking the lead as far as guiding the team. So you have that kind of situation. And like the example you talked about with your son and the game night thing. One thing you have to be aware of, though, is that when it comes to our kids, they won't necessarily volunteer to lead because they still lack the confidence, or they lack they think that they don't necessarily have the ability to do what you need someone to do. So asking for a volunteer, like when I do that, when I coach a team, it's like, hey, I need a volunteer for this. And it's funny how no hands go up. And it's like no one wants to do it. But if I say, hey, Johnny, I need you to take this, and I need Billy, I need you to take this, and Mikey, I need you to take that. Boom. Now they're like, uh-oh, coach put me on the spot. I got to get this done. And now they take it. And once they take it and run with it, and then I praise them for it. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate you helping out. You did something for the team. That was great. Then they'll want to do it again. And that's the same thing for our kids. You give our kids a responsibility, a task to figure out something for the family, whether it's game night, dinner, those kinds of things, and allow them to take that lead and guide them through it when they need it, but allow them to take that lead and then praise them for the job that they did. That will in turn help them develop that confidence to want to do it again. Because as we talked about earlier, people like to get praise to themselves, right? They like to get praise from other people. They like the affirmation from other people that they're doing a great job. So I think it's really important. Like your son, he obviously volunteered to do the game night, and that was something that just was naturally for him. He was good at. He liked doing that kind of stuff, so that's why he did that. But kids don't necessarily do that all the time, especially in school activities or sporting activities,
Yeah,
right?
and Bryan, you bring out a good point. Is that and that's one thing we try to teach in this Kid Lead Academy program to train parents is that you have to be more intentional about it. So even in our curricula where we have it's all project based where the students lead their peers or lead others in it, we actually say, okay, create a leader lanyard and you put it around the neck of that child so that they know and everyone else knows Sarah's in charge. And so, Sarah, you're wearing the leader lanyard. It's your turn because you're right. A lot of times they won't volunteer,
Right.
and certainly among peers they won't. And sometimes the ones that do volunteer, you're thinking, no, no, or they're always volunteer. So I think intentionally, as the adult with the authority, putting that sort of lanyard around the child, saying, okay, you're the team leader, it designates them and elevates them, and also says to everyone else, okay, Sarah's in charge. Don't try to take over Sarah's job.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying is it's got to be intentional, and adults can do so much, but sometimes we wait for the volunteer or we just assign tasks willy-nilly without thinking about it.
Yeah. No, when you talked about that, it kind of brings back memories from the Marine Corps. It's like when I was in the military, I was told before I went to boot camp, don't volunteer for nothing, keep your mouth shut and do as you're told. That's what I was told by my recruiter. Don't volunteer for nothing, keep your mouth shut and do as you're told. And so naturally, like I just didn't volunteer for anything. I was like, I'm not saying nothing. I'm going to do as I told. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to volunteer. And, I think honestly that probably hurt me a little bit through the Marine Corps. I didn't get to develop as many
Yeah,
skills or as many
yeah,
abilities that I knew I had. I played sports all through high school. I was captains on teams. I had the natural ability
yeah,
to lead and
yeah,
didn't have fear from it. So doing that in the Marine Corps, obviously kids are intimidated when they go into boot camp. But
yeah.
yeah, it was the same kind of thing. I didn't want to volunteer. So unless I was called on, you weren't hearing a peep out of me. And I think that was majority of the case for the rest of the guys in the platoon. So that's why I say it's super important for you to not just ask for volunteers. I mean, you're certainly welcome to do that, parents or coaches. Asking for volunteers is fine, but don't be surprised if you don't have any hands going up.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure you're calling them.
Or the hands that go up are not the ones that you would recommend.
Right.
So
Right.
or in the military, it's of course they call it voluntold.
Right.
So
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
know that's like,
Yep, absolutely. Well, cool. Let's talk about Kid Lead. Let's talk about your book. Tell me a little bit about both of those before we close for the day.
you bet. Well, the book you've seen on my screen there, My Kid Leads, is really kind of a how-to manual that we've learned after 15 years of working with thousands of preteens and teens around the world, 8 different countries. We've trained 22 countries' leaders how to use this material. But when we said it's not working in schools, they have no bandwidth, church faith communities, or there's no bandwidth there. So we just said we're taking it directly to parent. This no more business to business. It's B2C, right? We're going right to the consumer. So we created an online course that's called KiddieLead Academy, and it's 7 concentrated hours of 5 to 25 minute videos that takes our best training and teaches literally step by step. Here's how to train a child. Here's how to discern their leadership aptitude. Here's an assessment you can take on your child. Here are 5 steps to do this. Here are 5 barriers to tear down. So we try to make it as user friendly as possible, but I'm excited because it really gives leaders a head start. Harvard Business Review published a blog result of 17,000 managers asked, when's your first formal leadership training? Average age, 42.
Mhm.
So we're saying 42, it should be 12. So
Right.
we're literally encouraging parents to give their child a 20 to 30-year head start on everyone else, because that's when we get them when they're moldable, not moldy. And we can help them be not only effective, but as you know, Bryan, ethical. Ethical
Mhm.
leaders are in great demand today. And because of that, this week I'm teaching at Naval Academy in Annapolis. And the reason why we have such great military is because of unethical leaders around the world. If all leaders were ethical, we would have a minimal military, but they're not. And so we need the same thing in our communities. We need the same thing in our businesses. We need people who are not only ethical, but effective, and not only effective, but ethical. So you got to do that. Start young, start when they're moldable.
Yeah.
That's
Uh,
it.
I think moldable is good because I think about this. I'm putting my coach hat back on, but I used to I talk to other coaches or other teams, and I used to tell them, look, I would rather have a player that has no skills and is coachable than a player who thinks he has all the skills and is not coachable. I would rather have that kid that has no skills and is coachable, because that allows me to train them to help them develop to be better. If you
Yep.
take a kid that thinks he's God's gift to whatever sport he's playing and he's not coachable, that kid is so hard to handle. That kid is so hard to teach. That kid is so hard to fix. There's going to be things that he's doing wrong. You're not going to be able to fix it. And so that's what he's talking about when he talks about being a kid that's being molded or a kid that's moldy. That's what he's talking about, is those two references right there. So I think that's perfect. And I think when it comes to your book, especially the KiddieLead Academy, finished off with your book, is really will give parents a good understanding, a good foothold on what it means to not only teach our kids how to be better leaders, but also you parents teaching you how to be a better leader in the way that you're training
Yep.
your kids as well. So
Yep.
it works both ways. We're trying to
Yep.
learn this through your Kid Academy, the KiddieLead Academy, that this is how I teach my kid to become better leader. But while I'm doing that, I'm learning these skills that I can then implement in my own business,
Yep.
in corporate America, in my own family, those kind of things. So
Yep.
that's good stuff, man. Really, really good. I'm glad that you guys are doing that, and really good. I do want to give you an opportunity though, Alan, for my listeners, viewers that are watching this, best places for them to reach out to you, best places for them to find the book, find the academy, all those things.
You bet. So I just go to the website, kidlead.com, KID as in David, LEAD as in David.com, or you can go to LeadYoung Training Systems, LeadYoung Training, is where you'll find our curricula and books and free articles and free assessments. So the courses at KiddieLead.com, the resources and free articles are at LeadYoungTraining.com. Both of those will allow you to connect with me if you want to.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge when it comes to how we as parents can help develop leaders in our kids naturally and without forcing it on them, right? But teaching us as parents how to develop that leadership skill in them, but also helping us be better leaders as parents. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you being on, brother. I'm looking forward to continuing our friendship and definitely going to stay in touch with you. But thank you very much for being on the Dad Up.
Thanks, Bryan. My honor.
Awesome. Listen, guys, it's been another episode of Dad Up Podcast. I want to thank my good friend, Dr. Alan Nelson, for being on the show. Guys, make sure you check out his book. Make sure you check out his website. I will have all the links in the show notes as usual. So please make sure you go there. If you have questions, if you want to reach out to him, you can certainly do that. But as always, if you have not yet subscribed to my show, please make sure you do that as well, so you don't miss any of the awesome guests I have on each and every week. And I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at Dad Up Podcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.